What if Hephaestus never fell in love with Aphrodite? World So10 Mount Olympus. The beginning of everything. Theory Part 1. Do you really think I'm going to forgive you? All the pain I've endured so far just because I tried to love you. And yet, you never cared about me. So many years of doing the impossible, just to make you love me a little bit, but you never cared about me. For in your eyes, I was simply disposable trash. He turned away, leaving a beautiful woman in tears from the sadness and pain she felt in her chest. She stretched out her hand in the direction of the one she began to love, screaming his name for him to return, but he never turned to look at her again. She simply fell to the floor, shattered, as more tears fell from her eyes, for she knew she had lost the one who loved her. To understand this story, we must go back many years ago, on an island where a young god lived. His main feature was his long blood-red hair. His strong body was accompanied by several red and black spots similar to a tattoo that covered a large part of his body, as well as 2 horns. He currently had a beautiful smile, as they were celebrating his adoptive mother's birthday. And although she was not of his blood, he loved her as if she were his biological mother. Thanks to her, he was able to find his vocation, which was to be a blacksmith, the best blacksmith of all. Although don't trust him, for he is also a powerful warrior with strength beyond the unthinkable. Thetis today was the happiest woman in the world. Her son threw her the greatest of parties and invited all the nymphs who lived on that island. The center of attention at that party was Thetis, for she wore one of the most beautiful dresses for that time. And that dress was designed by her own son, that he loved with all his heart. He was not only good at creating weapons and armor, he was good, too, at creating just about anything. Everyone in that place got along quite well with Hephaestus, for although in appearance he was not the most beautiful, and could be intimidating and somewhat scary, for most of the male gods had a feminine trait that gave them a touch of elegance and beauty. Hephaestus, on the other hand, had a more demon-like appearance. But don't be fooled by his looks, for he is someone very gentle. After more celebration, we see Hephaestus, who is picking up all the mess and cleaning up the place. He was humming a tune he had heard until he was interrupted by someone tapping him on his shoulder. When he looked up, he was surprised, for in his eyes were 2 beautiful ladies. He put his surprise aside and gave a huge smile. "Hello, my name is Hephaestus. How can I help you?" The one with blonde hair, who had a serious look, said nothing. Instead, the one next to him, and with red hair like his own, gave a big smile. "Hello, young god. My name is Hestia." The young man was taken aback, for by hearing the name, he already knew who it was, for his mother told him of her origins. He already knew of her family, though he had never seen them face to face. "Hello, dear aunt," was the simple answer that young man gave. Then Hephaestus's gaze goes to the companion, who has said nothing so far. Hestia, with a smile, she jabbed her rib with her elbow at another of her nieces, to get her to speak and not keep quiet. The blonde-haired woman replied, "I am the goddess of wisdom. I am Athena." He gave a big smile and simply said, "It's nice to meet you, sister." Hephaestus kindly made both goddesses enter the house where he lived with their mother, and he offered them the snacks and food left over from the feast. Hestia, with a big smile, accepted and devoured practically everything there was, and Athena just stood on the sidelines and did nothing. Hephaestus had an anime-style bead of sweat, for the way the 2 goddesses acted were completely different from each other. After several hours, Hephaestus put on a serious look. "Although I am happy to meet some of my relatives, I want to know why they are here, and I don't want to hear lie. You don't give me orders. I am one of the goddesses of Olympus, and have a little more respect when speaking to me," was the stern reply her sister gave. Hestia simply gives a sigh of annoyance, for the behavior of many of her family members was something quite troublesome that she had to put up with. Cough, cough. "The reason I came for you, nephew, it's because we've been ordered to take you to Olympus." Both goddesses, they thought he was going to gladly accept. He put on a nervous smile and simply shook his head. "I'm sorry, but I don't want to. My home is here next to my mother, and if I leave, you might make her sad." My home is next to those people who love me, and Olympus is not that place. Athena. She lost her patience and summoned a spear. Who said you could refuse? It's an order and you have to carry it out. Neither Hephaestus nor Hestia liked that way of speaking of that goddess. I'm sorry, sister, but I don't want to. Tell Zeus or the one who sent you here that he came for pleasure, for I did not look from here. Athena, no longer putting up with all this waste of time, she rushed forward with the aim of attacking and knocking out Hephaestus. But to the surprise of both, that young god, with one hand he stopped the spear, and with the other hand he positioned himself behind Athena, and grabbed her by the neck and slammed her to the ground. Hephaestus, with an annoyed voice, his sister speaks to him. Do not attack me again. If you try again, I won't be very merciful, like this time. Nephew, can you please let her go? Hephaestus heeded his aunt Hestia. He looked at both goddesses. Please. I will ask you kindly to leave my home and return to us, if you come for the same reason again. Athena did not delay another 1 second and disappeared in a beam of light. Hestia looked at him with a sad face, for she wanted her nephew to come to Olympus. Hephaestus noticed this and softened his gaze. He approached at a slow pace, where his aunt, and with his strong arms he wrapped his arms around her waist in a gentle embrace. Hestia, for a few moments, was quite taken aback, for, although she was a rather gentle goddess, she didn't like men getting too close to her, let alone having physical contact. For a few moments, her first reaction was to push him away, and turn away from him, until she heard the following. Forgive me, aunt. Even if I don't want to go there, I'm most likely just going to visit you, so don't feel bad that I'm not going to live there. If it makes you happy, then I'll visit you every day I can. This one couldn't help but give a big smile. Don't worry, I understand. I'll be waiting for your visit, and I'll prepare some nice treats for you when you arrive. With all that, they said goodbye and each one left. When this one already arrived at Olympus, he heard a thunder. With a sigh he went straight to the meeting that Zeus had called. This one, still with her smile, entered the meeting hall, and noticed that everyone was already there. From what I have heard from my daughter, it seems that the smith did not want to come. With the words of a seated Zeus on his throne. You are correct, brother. He's very happy where he is right now, and has no plans to come here to stay permanently. Then he puts on a beautiful smile. Although he did say he was going to come here quite often to visit me. Zeus meditated for a while. Sister, I will charge you as my mission to convince that blacksmith to stay permanently on Olympus. From what I have heard, his works are first class and of high quality. Hestia refused, but all the gods there voted for her to fulfill the mission given by Zeus, with no other choice. She had to reluctantly agree. Zeus, for a moment, contemplates an idea and makes it known to the rest of the gods present. If your plan to convince him fails, then I will give him my hand in marriage to any of the goddesses he wants. That surprised everyone, and many of the goddesses present did not agree. Zeus summoned a thunderbolt in his hand, and they all fell silent and ended the discussions. I am the king. I decide what to do, and you will have to obey. Be clear. Everyone nodded in confirmation. The mission fails and the plan is carried out. Theory Part 2. As Zeus had predicted, Hephaestus was not convinced to stay and live on Mount Olympus, so he proceeded with Plan B. With one of his thunderbolts, he made all of Olympus resound to signify that a meeting had been called. In less than 1 hour everyone was already assembled. Listen everyone, Hestia has informed me that Hephaestus still does not want to stay here permanently. Apollo raised his hand. Father, but I still don't understand why you want that ugly thing to be here. It's simple, his forging ability. He's on the side of the Cyclops, of which you murdered almost all of them. With those answers, Apollo fell silent and lowered his hand. Then I'll use Plan B. His 2 hands rest on his chin, pondering what to do. Is the question, who will be left as wife? Then his gaze settles on his son Hermes. Go and fetch your brother and bring him here this very instant. When he has gone, Athena raises her hand. I still don't understand, father, why we should be so generous to that god. Daughter, As you may already know, all pantheons have their god, who represents forging and helps them to always have high quality weapons. That is why we must also have our own god of the forge. Then his gaze falls on his wife, who was very silent these days. Besides, he's your brother, and he has a right to be here, along with the other Olympians, and claim his positions as one of us. Ars angrily knocks on the main table of the room. I don't agree with that. Isn't he worthy of being a god? Haven't you seen what he looks like? Some others make fun, because Hephaestus was somewhat ugly compared to them, and his demonic aspect was not well seen by them. Still no one noticed, but Hephaestus was already in that place, and it was not to his liking what he was hearing from his relatives. Zeus, did you call me to hear how they mock me? Those words made everyone shut up, and Zeus got a little nervous. Cough, cough. This was not my intention, son. I only called you here to propose something to you, so you can stay here permanently on Mount Olympus. Hephaestus folded his arms. I have already told you. There is no need for you to call me son, if I really am not. Besides, my mother is not here. She's a sea nymph. Some of you already know her as Thetis, and together with her, we live on the island of Lemnos. He was leaving this place to return to his home, where his mother lives. Stop there. Zeus shouted to Hephaestus. If you stay and live here, I will give your hand in marriage to any goddess you want. He stood there for a while and contemplated the proposal that the king of Olympus had given him. I agree to live here if you give me the hand in marriage of the most beautiful goddess in this place. With that said, he left the place, leaving everyone surprised and in doubt. Who would be the most beautiful? 3 months had passed since that meeting, and Zeus has been with a headache, because it has been one problem after another. Several goddesses, although they did not want to marry that god, were arguing over who was the most beautiful. Another problem was that a new goddess called Aphrodite had arrived. That made both gods, men and women gods, went crazy just to be with her. It was there where he came up with an idea. For Aphrodite was not only the goddess of love, but she was also the goddess of beauty. So what better choice than the goddess who has the mastery of beauty to marry Hephaestus, who is looking for the most beautiful goddess? And with that planned, he ordered several gods to begin preparations for the wedding event of Hephaestus and Aphrodite. And so less than a week passed and everything was ready. Hephaestus had already been informed that his wedding was near. He was quite anxious to know the identity of his wife, for he loved only one, and in his eyes, she was the most beautiful of them all, and he hoped with all his heart to marry her. That the goddess who had stolen his heart was the very goddess of fire and hearth. The days leading up to his wedding he spent it being with Hestia, having fun and generally having an excellent time, for the two of them got along quite well. One day, while they were having lunch with Hestia, she out of the blue asks him a question that left him quite surprised. Hey, Hephaestus, you know who you're going to marry? Cough, cough. Hephaestus had choked on the food in his mouth. With a nervous smile, he replied, I still don't know who my wife is, and I'm really quite anxious to meet her. She gave a warm smile, and with her hand, he touched her shoulder as a gesture for her confidence. Speaking of which, who would you like to marry? There are several really pretty goddesses, and who I would be quite happy with. Hephaestus' mood dropped for a moment, as the goddess who had stolen his heart stood in front of her, but clearly, she had no feelings for him. I love only one anymore, for the answer she gave in a whisper. Hestia clearly heard that, and she was glad that her best friend, a nephew, was in love with someone. He gave a little jump of happiness, and at great speed went to hug his friend. With a big smile and hitting his belly with his elbow, he was insisting to tell him who the lucky girl was. Let's go. Don't be mean. Tell me who is the lucky one. Hephaestus was silent for a moment, and he lowered his gaze. If I tell you who I love, we might not be friends anymore, and that would really hurt me a lot. Before he said more, he felt some warm hugs. It was Hestia herself, who had a big smile on her face as she hugged him. Their gazes met for a moment. While one had a big smile, the other had a sad face. The one I like is you. and I really hope you're the one I'm going to marry. For I would make you the happiest woman in the world, and every day I would show you that I really love you." Hestia, that's when she understood why her friend didn't want to tell her who she liked. She got the sad look on her face, and broke away from the embrace. She walked towards the door of her home, and with a hand gesture, she gave to understand that she wanted Hephaestus to leave. He really wanted to cry right there, but possibly pathetic in the eyes of that woman who dated him in her heart, accepting that he would never have her heart. He went to the door and left without turning back or saying goodbye. Hestia, with sad looks, closed the door. She slumped to the floor, sitting down as a couple of tears spilled from her eyes. "I'm sorry, but even if I loved you, I could never give you what everyone wants. I could never give you a family." He forced himself to think he was right. She already knew who she was going to marry anyway. Even if he didn't like the lucky goddess, he hoped she could make him happy. The expected day arrived, and all were gathered goddesses, nymphs, and any deity was on Mount Olympus celebrating the wedding of Hephaestus and the most beautiful goddess. Hera was in charge of the wedding. Hephaestus, well-dressed, was waiting at the altar for the bride to come. He's very nervous and had a little hope that his future wife would be Hestia. When the big door of the hall opened, a beautiful goddess in a beautiful dress entered. The music played. Hephaestus had a big smile. For since he could not see her face because of the veil of the dress, he was hopeful that it was Hestia. When the future husband and the future wife were face to face, that was when Hera began to speak. "Welcome everyone on this important day, and where one of the Olympians will marry one of the Olympians." That comment confused Hephaestus, for he knew that she was not part of the Olympians. Hera resumed speaking, and her gaze turned to her son, whom she disowned when he was born. "Hephaestus, god of the forge, begin with your vow." Hephaestus took a couple of breaths to calm his heart, which was very nervous. "I vow, before all that are listening to me, that I will love you. I will do everything I can to make you happy, so that we can have a big family." He puts on a big smile and keeps talking. "I know you are not the queen of Olympus, but to me you are my queen, and I will treat you like one. I will do my best to make this commitment last forever, and no one will be able to break this commitment, and the only one with the power to break this will be you." When Hephaestus was about to remove the veil from his wife, with his corner of his eye, he can manage to see the distant figure of Hestia, who had a nice dress of the color orange. But if you took a good look at her and saw her face, you could dazzle a trace of sadness. Hephaestus finished removing the veil, and the woman in front of him was none other than Aphrodite. Contrary to what everyone would think, she was very happy, for although Hephaestus was not the most beautiful god, she knew he had a sweet and kind heart. And of the few times she interacted with him, Hephaestus treated her with kindness, and his eyes never showed lust for her. But when she heard her future husband's vow, she was captivated, and knew he would be the perfect man. But at the last moment, she could feel something that bothered and saddened her, for she could see how her future husband was watching Hestia, and she knew that his eyes showed love and deep sadness. At that moment, something inside her broke. For the man who had decided to give her his love, he loved another, and that she would not forgive. A growing and uncontrolled anger began to rise from within her, with the sole purpose of making the man who had betrayed her suffer. Hera looked at Aphrodite, and could see that she had a look of hatred towards her son. For a moment, she contemplated whether to end this and interrupt the wedding, but she dismissed it. "Aphrodite, now it's your turn. Say your vow. I, the goddess of love, will only give love to the man I love. I will give my body and heart, so that he will be happy, and I will make this marriage last as long as I can, and no matter what suffering one of us goes through, our union will not be easily destroyed." Most of the audience shouted to celebrate the new union on Olympus, but there was one goddess who gave him a bad feeling, the vow of Aphrodite, and she was the goddess of the hearth, Hestia. After that the feast continued, and Dionysus brought with him endless drinks for everyone to drink. Hephaestus stepped away from his current wife for a few moments, and went to confront Hestia. He watched as she was conversing with other goddesses. So he calmly approached and tapped her on the shoulder to get her attention. "You have a little time from me. I want to tell you something." Hestia apologized to the goddesses who were conversing with her and followed Hephaestus to another place to converse privately. "Tell me, Hestia, is it really okay for me to marry Aphrodite?" She was silent for a few seconds, but in a stern voice, she answered, "She's your wife now. You should not converse with others, but spend it with her, for today you got married." Then she put on a nice smile. "Relax. It may not have been what you wanted, but it is what it is. And even if you don't love her yet, I know you'll be able to get over how you feel about me, and make her happy, so drop that sad face, and go find your wife." He was silent, for he was processing what she had told him. With his hand he clutched his forehead. "Okay. I'll listen to you, and I will make my relationship with her work. All the love I feel for you I will give to her. Goodbye." And Hephaestus withdrew from the place, leaving a confused Hestia, for, on the one hand, she wanted to say that she did have feelings for him, but on the other hand, she wasn't sure, for she had never experienced love, and that had her very confused. Although it didn't matter now, for now he was married, no longer in the mood. He left the place and went home. What neither of them noticed was that someone had been stalking them from afar. Aphrodite saw the interaction of her husband and Hestia, and in her eyes, he was being unfaithful to her. With a wicked grin he spoke to himself, "If you cheat on me, then it's okay for me to do the same, right?" Hephaestus spent several hours trying to look for his wife at the party, but couldn't find her. So he decided to look for her in his temple. When he got there he came across something he never expected, for it was his wife, and she was in an act of intimacy with one of his brothers. Hephaestus was filled with fury, and with a cry of savagery, he shouted out his brother's name, Ras, Aphrodite, and Ars stopped their act, and without time to react, Ars received a tremendous blow to the face. But he didn't stop there. With more force and devastating blows, he continued to smash his brother's face. After calming down he turned his gaze to his wife. "What is the meaning of this, Aphrodite? Why are you cheating on me on the first day of our engagement?" She then made an annoyed face. "You're the one cheating on me. Do you think I didn't see you were chatting placidly with Hestia?" That's when Hephaestus knew why Aphrodite acted that way. Hephaestus approached with slow steps, and with his hands delicately grabbed Aphrodite's face. "Listen to me. You are misunderstanding things. It is true that I was with her conversing, but I was not deceiving you, and remember that I swore I would do everything I could to make you happy." Aphrodite, for a moment, regretted the way she acted, but through her mind flashed the image of him and Hestia deceiving him, and her heart was filled with hatred. "If you want me to believe that, prove it." He bowed his head in confusion. "How can I prove to you that I'm speaking the truth to you? Don't hang out with her anymore. Don't talk to her anymore. If I see that you do not heed me, then I will do as I please, and I don't want any complaints from you." He was undecided whether or not to accept that. But since Hestia didn't love him, then he saw no point in refusing that offer. All right, and it was from that day that Hephaestus' torment began. For pitifully in his vow of commitment, he said he would do everything he could to make it work, and make their marriage last. "I can't stand you anymore." Theory Part 3. And as promised, he never spoke to Hestia again. She, at first, tried her best to speak to him again, but when nothing worked, she gave up trying to speak to him. Hestia was sad, but she understood that he was hurt, and she would respect his decision to no longer speak to her. What she didn't know was that this was not the reason why Hephaestus no longer spoke to her. Since Hephaestus had married, approximately 800 years had passed, and for our blacksmith god, it was complete suffering and chaos in his life. Once a happy, cheerful god with a noble and kind heart, now he was a bitter god who barely spoke to people. For in the beginning of their relationship, Aphrodite acted like a good wife, and won the affection of Hephaestus, and that's why he did everything he could to make their relationship work. Unfortunately, that was impossible. And the main responsible was Aphrodite herself. She acted at first as a good wife to win Hephaestus' affection, and once she had Hephaestus' heart in her hand, then she would tear him apart, and so she did. She treated him badly. She would say hurtful things to him many times. All the appointments, gifts that her husband made to her, she would ignore him, or in the case of gifts, she would simply smash him to his face, or she would premiere him to her lovers. Hephaestus did everything to win Aphrodite's heart, but she simply made it impossible. For her heart, who once loved Hephaestus, now only hated him and wanted to see him suffer as much as possible. One of the things that had hurt the blacksmith god the most, it was that she had made him believe that her first child was his. So Hephaestus cared for and raised a child that was not his. And when she told him the truth, he simply collapsed to the ground while crying, and he cried out in tears why she acted so horribly towards him. She, with a cold and unsympathetic stare, replied, "You hurt me, so suck it up." She kept doing the same trick of tricking him that she had a child of his, to the end, simply shattering his heart. As the years went by, the change in Hephaestus was clear to see, for he hardly smiled anymore. He always had a sad look on his face, but as the years went on and on, that sad face changed to one of annoyance and indifference towards everyone. Hestia always stayed on the sidelines, but she saw the change in her friend, and the one who had stolen her heart. Well, she had a long talk with her mother, and at the end of the conversation, her mother gave her a slap on the head for being so silly and leaving the person she loves because of her insecurities. But there was nothing he could do. He could only watch from afar as his friend was hurting himself. He only prayed that things would get better for him. Hephaestus was currently in his forge, and was making a very special weapon, a weapon capable of cutting through anything, even the engagement of gods, which was said to be impossible to break the bond of marriage. He picked up a towel and wiped the sweat from his brow, for he had been at that job for more than a week without rest. His eyes reflected the exhaustion and pain he had endured so far. But with a serious look, he cries out to himself, "I won't put up with any more of this. I was right to never come here. I should have stayed with my mother Thetis on the island Lemnos." After several hours, he finally finishes his work. It was a small dagger that had a very particular glow. "With this, I will finally be free of this commitment full of lies and pain." She takes her dagger, keeps it in one of her pockets, and leaves the place with only one purpose, to end his marriage to Aphrodite. As he walked through the streets of Olympus, you could hear how several gods laughed at him, for he was well known as the god they were unfaithful to. He clenched his fist in hatred, and was holding back from going up to them, beating the crap out of them. Each one of them who spoke ill of him. The only thing that stopped him from doing such a violent act was the teachings of his mother, Thetis. She told him that violence was not the solution to things, and there was always a more peaceful way to settle things. He would go to the temple, where he lived with his wife, or rather it was the temple where she brought all her lovers, and they spent several nights there. Before arriving at the temple, he ran into several of his wife's children. Some of them were talking to him with a nervous smile, but he did not even flinch. His face was expressionless and conveyed nothing. Some of them, he himself raised and cared for them as if they were his own children, even already knowing that his wife was always cheating on him, and none of them was his blood child. But what completely destroyed him, it was that when the children themselves found out who they were father, they did not hesitate even for a moment to abandon him and go to their real father. That ended up breaking something inside him, even to the daughter who gave him all her love, the little Harmonia, which he raised and taught to be a gentle and loving goddess. But even she abandoned her, and when several of his children came to their senses and wanted his forgiveness, he did nothing, for the feeling and love he had in each of them was gone, and there was nothing left within himself that he could feel, so he simply ignored them. Even when Harmony herself knelt down and cried and asked for his forgiveness, he simply walked past them. Aphrodite one day faced him and asked him why he was behaving like this. He always said the same thing. "She's not my daughter. You told me so yourself, don't you remember? With that simple answer, she always kept quiet, and after that, she would simply leave and not even sleep there, because in her eyes, the place where they were supposed to live as a family was stained by the actions of his wife. Now we find ourselves in the temple of the goddess of love, for after a 6-hour session of sexual intercourse with one of her favorite lovers, Ars, she was meditating on her husband. I think it's about time I settled things with Hephaestus. As far as I know, it's been over 700 years since he and Hestia have spoken to each other. I guess I was wrong, and they never really cheated on me. Then he puts on a sad, regretful look. If that's true, then it means I've hurt my husband's heart all this time. She remembers also that many of her children are sad, for many of them went to their parents and left Hephaestus aside. Always when that happened, he would collapse to the ground on his knees, while crying and screaming with tears that they will not leave her. She, the first time that happened, felt satisfied, for she saw her husband's pain, compensating for the pain she had felt at the beginning. But as time passed, she began to regret it, for she no longer felt satisfaction in making her husband feel bad. On the contrary, it always hurt her to see her husband with tears and a lost look that reflected how damaged and hurt he was inside. For many of his lovers did not want to take care of their children, so she simply left them in the care of her husband. And when they grew up, that's when the biological parents showed up to claim their children. It was very unfair to him, and it was idiotic of her to make her husband feel bad and hurt him. She only began to rethink the way she acted with her husband when many of her children came to her, crying and saying they missed Hephaestus. She also remembers when her daughter Harmonia ran to her arms and cried like she had never done. She loved her children, and with anger she went to face her husband for his way of acting. To her complete shock, he told her words that really hurt her. Or rather, he told her the truth, a really painful truth for her. And that's when it just hit her. Her husband no longer had the smile he had at the beginning. He didn't even have the sad and pained look because of the cruel things she has done to him. Now he had a broken look, but no longer expressed anything. What am I supposed to do? His thoughts were interrupted when the door to her living room was opened, and she saw her husband. She had a big smile and greeted him. "Hello my love, how have you been?" She received no reply. She only watched as he approached at a slow pace. Hephaestus was a step away from her. She felt nervous. Hephaestus, without saying anything to her, grabbed her hand, where she had the ring. With his free hand, he put it in his pocket. Then at great speed, he moved her hand. At first, she didn't know what was happening, but a sound of something falling caught my attention. That's when my heart stopped, for I saw the symbol of our union on the ground. I saw with a look of horror a wedding ring cut in two. Hephaestus speaks to me with his expressionless gaze. I kept our vow. I did everything I could to make our marriage work. A few tears came to his eyes. Don't you know the pain I had to endure? But as I said in our vow, only you had the power to end our relationship. Hephaestus wipes away the few tears he had, turned and walked away with the intention of never returning. Now it was the goddess of love who was crying. As best she could, she tried to get out of bed to go after her husband. But as she took the first step she fell. Her body trembled. A feeling of fear and pain invaded her body that prevented her from walking well, for her leg trembled. As best she could, she crawled on the ground and reached Hephaestus and grabbed her leg. She, in a sea of tears, she said she loved him, that he was her whole world, that she regretted all the pain she had done to him, and that together they could work things out. "Could you forgive me?" was the plea in tears that Aphrodite said. He simply ignored her and continued on his way, and never looked at his ex-wife, who was left in tears and remorse for her horrible behavior. She simply fell to the floor in tears, as more tears fell from her eyes. She knew she had lost the one who loved her, for it was very foolish of her to have hurt her husband's heart. Hephaestus was about to leave Olympus, never to return, but in front of him stood a goddess who had not spoken to her again in quite some time. "Can we talk for a while before you go?" was the question Hestia asked. She asked him, and asked him to tell her how he had lived, and wanted to know the whole truth. Hephaestus nodded his head. Hephaestus, with an expressionless look, told her everything that had happened. Hestia was crying silently. Because she did not want to interrupt the story, she regretted not having done something in the past to avoid the pain he had gone through. After 1 hour of telling his whole story, he was ready to leave the place that brought him so much pain. But Hestia did not let him. This time she was not going to stand still and do nothing. "Will you be my husband?" Hephaestus didn't stop his walk, but he still answered, "I'm no longer the same one you knew years ago. I don't think you'd like to pass as the present me. Then I will accompany you and spend all the time with you, and I will make you agree to be my husband. ... Hephaestus, he stopped and turned away. "I'll be gone forever. I'll never come back here. If you want to be with me so badly, you'll have to choose between them or me." She was silent, not knowing what to do. "If you can't do that, then stay here and don't follow me." He turned away again and continued on his way. But a hand grabs him. He doesn't turn his eyes. But he could hear Hestia's little sobs. "We made you choose you before. We made you choose to live here and leave your happiness. As a result, we hurt you and your heart is hurt." She then hugs him. "Well, today, it's my turn to say." She then looks up and sees Hephaestus' expressionless face. "And I decide to stand by you for the rest in my life. I swear." She puts on a big smile, and with her hands clasps Hephaestus' face and pulls her close. She gives Hephaestus a warm kiss. After a few minutes they separate from the kiss, but Hephaestus went on his way. Hestia had her eyes down, and was about to cry, until he heard Hephaestus' voice. "What are you doing standing there doing nothing? Come, or do you want to stay?" With those words he made Hestia's heart beat with strength and happiness. She wasted no time, and went running to his side. They went on with their walk, but Hestia had him in her arms as they continued on their way. She had a big smile on her face, and Hephaestus likewise had a little smile and thought to himself, "Thetis will be happy that you are my wife." End of story. Thank you very much. We are already over 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. Remember that my story is to entertain. The characters are not faithful to the mythological tales or anime. We are currently with a new content, which is manga summary. I hope you like it, and we can continue with this content and in the future bring different types of content to bring more variety to the channel.